There comes a moment in every woman's life when something inside her refuses to play along. She can't explain it. She just knows. The smile feels forced. The silence feels heavy. The pretending feels impossible. This isn't rebellion. It's awakening. And from that moment on, there are lines she will never again let anyone cross. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Not from hardness, but from finally remembering who she is. Carl Jung called it individuation, the sacred process of returning to the self. It's the invisible revolution that begins the moment a woman stops being who the world told her to be and starts becoming who her soul always was. In this video, we'll explore 7 boundaries that every truly awakened woman protects like sacred ground, and why crossing even one of them will cost her peace, identity, and power. But first, what really happens in that moment when a woman awakens? Because it's not what you think. Awakening rarely arrives with lightning or applause. It doesn't announce itself in grand speeches or radiant visions. It's quieter than that, almost invisible. It begins in the body, a deep cellular knowing that whispers, "No more." No more shrinking, no more pretending, no more betraying your own soul just to keep the peace. At first, it feels confusing, almost disorienting. You start saying no to things you used to tolerate, and you don't even know why. You pull away from people who once felt like home, but now drain your energy with every conversation. It's as if your spirit has started sorting through your life, deciding what still belongs to you and what never did. Carl Jung described this as the process of individuation, when the self begins to reclaim all the pieces it gave away to survive. And as that inner reorganization happens, a woman begins to sense something sacred, where her energy ends and the world's expectations begin. That's when her first true boundary is born. It's not drawn with anger. It rises like truth from the core of her being. And it sounds like this: I will no longer let others tell me who I am. Because for years, she lived inside a script she didn't write. A daughter trained to please, a partner taught to endure, a woman told to smile even when her soul was breaking. She became the role everyone needed her to play, until one day her own essence refused to perform. That breaking point wasn't destruction. It was the beginning of remembering. The first line she will never again let be crossed is the definition of her very being. But why is this first boundary the hardest and the most liberating one to protect? Because breaking it means losing the version of you that made everyone else comfortable. And yet, it's the only way to meet the real you. It begins on an ordinary morning. No thunder, no revelation, just the mirror. She stands before it, her reflection still soft from sleep, and for the first time she doesn't rush to fix herself. She simply looks. And in that silence, she sees the woman she has been trained to perform, the helper, the listener, the good one, the endlessly accommodating soul who made peace her prison. Every smile she gave, every yes she whispered, had been a mask, perfectly fitted, beautifully convincing. Jung called it the persona, the face we wear to belong. But belonging built on performance always costs something: your truth. The awakened woman learns this the hard way. She realizes that she has spent years editing herself to make others comfortable, lowering her light so no one feels overshadowed, speaking softly so no one feels threatened, shrinking her dreams so no one feels left behind. But the soul eventually rebels, because the self, the real, untamed self, cannot live behind a mask forever. And when she finally lets the performance collapse, When she drops every role society applauds, something terrifying happens. Silence. Emptiness. People begin to question, "You've changed." And she answers, "Yes, I finally stopped pretending." That's the first boundary. She no longer allows anyone, not family, not love, not fear, to define who she must be. Because once a woman meets her real face, she will never again perform for acceptance. She will choose authenticity, even if it costs her applause. And that decision changes everything. Because the moment she stops performing, she starts feeling. And that feeling leads her to the next boundary, emotional ownership. The second boundary isn't visible to the eye. It's drawn deep within the mind. It's the moment she stops saying, "They made me feel this way." Because one day she realizes something quietly revolutionary. No one can make you feel anything that isn't already living inside you. People only touch what's already tender. Before awakening, she believed her emotions were the world's responsibility. If someone spoke harshly, she shrank. If they withdrew love, she shattered. If they gave approval, she glowed. Her sense of peace lived in other people's hands, fragile, borrowed, and easily stolen. But emotional dependency is a subtle form of self-abandonment, and an awakened woman no longer abandons herself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When she begins to own her emotions, she takes back her power from the shadows, from the parts of her that react instead of respond, that seek validation instead of truth. So she learns to pause, to breathe before she answers, to sit with her anger, her sadness, her longing, not as enemies, but as messengers. She realizes, "I am the sky, not the storm." And in that realization, her world changes. Because once you own your emotions, you stop giving others the power to control your peace. You stop chasing closure from people who never gave you clarity. You stop explaining your pain to those committed to misunderstanding it. That is the second boundary. My emotions are my responsibility. Your behavior is yours. And as she masters this, a new kind of calm emerges, the kind that cannot be performed, only lived. But peace, real peace, threatens the world that feeds on chaos. And that's why the next boundary is born, the one she learns through heartbreak and rebirth: energy protection. Energy doesn't lie. Even before words are spoken, the body already knows who feels safe, who feels heavy, who feels like home, and who drains the light out of the room. Before awakening, she ignored that knowing. She called it being nice. She gave endless second chances, long after her intuition screamed, "Leave." She poured herself into empty cups, believing kindness could fix everything. But kindness without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. It took her years to understand that not everyone deserves access to her energy, because energy is currency, and every interaction is an exchange. If you keep giving without awareness, you'll end up spiritually bankrupt. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And she began to see, some people react with healing, others with chaos. Some bring out her softness, others awaken her survival mode. So she starts protecting her peace the way sacred temples protect their altars, not out of fear, but out of reverence. She no longer picks up every call that vibrates her phone. She no longer explains her silence. She no longer confuses guilt with empathy. She has learned that not every connection deserves continuation. That's the third boundary. My energy is sacred. Access to me must be earned. And this isn't arrogance. It's stewardship.
Because when you guard your energy, you give love from overflow, not exhaustion. You stop trying to heal others at the expense of your own wholeness. And yet, this new calm creates a quiet tension inside her, because to truly protect her energy, she must now confront something deeper: her relationship with time. Time, the most sacred currency we'll ever hold. She used to spend it carelessly, pouring hours into conversations that went nowhere, waiting for people who never showed up, filling her calendar with obligations that didn't feed her soul. But awakening changes how you see minutes. You begin to realize that how you spend your time is how you spend your life. Before, she used to say yes to everything. She feared disappointing people. She confused availability with love. But now, she understands every yes is a quiet no to something else. And the things she's been saying no to were herself. Carl Jung wrote, "Hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil." Because in constant busyness, the soul cannot breathe. The awakened woman learns to pause, to schedule silence, to treat her focus like a sacred flame, never to be handed to the undeserving. She stops chasing every invitation, stops replying instantly, stops apologizing for taking time to think. Instead, she starts to measure people not by their words, but by how they honor her time. If they make her wait, manipulate urgency, or constantly pull her attention away, she notices, because her time is no longer for rent. That's the fourth boundary. If it costs my peace or purpose, it's too expensive for my time.
And something remarkable happens when she draws that line. Her life slows down, but her growth accelerates. She starts creating instead of reacting, building instead of begging. And in the stillness, her intuition gets louder. But that same stillness also reveals something painful: how often she's been keeping peace externally while waging war internally. There comes a moment when silence no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like home. She used to fear quiet rooms. She'd turn up the noise, conversations, music, scrolling, anything to avoid the echo of her own thoughts. Because peace once felt foreign, almost suspicious. But over time, she learned something extraordinary. Peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the refusal to let noise enter you. The world keeps teaching her to chase calm. A vacation will fix it. A relationship will bring it. Success will secure it. But she's tried all of that, and none of it lasted. Real peace, she discovered, is built from within. It's the discipline of choosing stillness even when chaos invites you to dance. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And becoming who you truly are requires silence. Not the passive kind, but the kind that heals. She no longer reacts to every storm. She doesn't enter every argument just to prove she's right. She doesn't explain herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. Her peace has become her proof. That's the fifth boundary. Not everything that demands my reaction deserves it. And so she learns to protect her calm like oxygen, because she knows that without it, every other boundary will collapse. She's no longer addicted to the chaos of others. She no longer chases emotional closure from people who thrive on confusion. She understands that maturity is measured by how quietly you walk away. But peace, no matter how sacred, will always be tested, especially by those who benefited from your lack of it. Not every goodbye is loud. Sometimes it's quiet, like the slow closing of a door that was once wide open. She used to believe love meant staying, that endurance was proof of care, that forgiveness meant forgetting.
But now she understands. Sometimes distance is the highest form of respect for both souls. Before awakening, she kept fighting to be understood. She'd rewrite her feelings in softer tones, explain her boundaries like apologies, and hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see her heart.
But you cannot make someone see you when they benefit from your blindness. You cannot teach reciprocity to those who thrive on taking. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." And she realized that by clinging to relationships that no longer fit, she was resisting her own evolution. So one day, she simply stopped fighting. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. She saw that peace and proximity are not the same. That love can still exist, even from far away. Emotional distance became her quiet rebellion. She learned to let people go without needing to prove a point, to stop reopening doors that life had already locked, to choose peace over performance even when her heart ached. That's the sixth boundary. I can love you and still walk away. It's not coldness, it's maturity, because love that costs your sanity is too expensive to keep. And once she learns this, she stops chasing people. She stops begging to be understood. She no longer fights to be chosen. She chooses herself. But self-love, if it's real, will demand the next evolution, one that shifts her from detachment into creation. Because now that her space is clean, she must decide who or what is allowed to enter. There comes a point when she stops giving everyone front row seats to her soul, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. For years, her life was an open door. Anyone could walk in, their words, their chaos, their projections. She'd listen, absorb, console, and carry. She mistook openness for love and availability for virtue. But awakening teaches discernment. Not everyone who knocks deserves entry. Not every presence deserves proximity. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And she realized, to become herself, she must guard the environments where her soul can breathe. So she begins a quiet reorganization. Some people move from daily conversations to occasional check-ins. Some from intimate access to distant observation. And some vanish altogether. This is not cruelty. It is energetic hygiene. It's the soul's way of saying, only those who water me may stay. Now, her space feels different, lighter, quieter, sacred. She no longer explains why some people no longer hear from her. She doesn't post grand announcements or burn bridges. She simply stops crossing them. Selective access is her way of honoring the divine law of resonance. What aligns stays. What doesn't fades without noise. And soon, she realizes her peace is not a place, it's a perimeter. But with this new perimeter comes the next challenge, the temptation of self-isolation. Because after a long season of boundaries, silence can start to feel like safety. Yet true healing doesn't end with walls, it ends with wholeness. Healing isn't isolation, it's integration. After months, maybe years of protecting her peace, she begins to sense something new stirring beneath the stillness, a quiet readiness to connect again. But this time she moves differently. She no longer confuses connection with collapse. She doesn't lose herself just to feel close to someone else. Her heart is open, yes, but rooted. Before awakening, she built her identity around being needed. Now, she chooses to be known. That's the difference between dependency and intimacy. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And that's how she now views love, not as completion, but as transformation. She no longer seeks someone to fill her emptiness. She seeks someone who can meet her fullness without fear. Reconnection doesn't mean returning to old circles. It means opening the door to new frequencies. People who speak the same emotional language, who don't flinch at depth, who see her boundaries not as barriers, but as beauty. And in this new rhythm, she learns a sacred truth. She can love without losing herself. She can give without depletion. She can be open and still remain whole. That is the true evolution of awakening. To realize that freedom and intimacy can coexist. To know that connection is not the opposite of solitude. It's what happens when solitude finally matures. But now that she's reconnected with others, a deeper boundary begins to emerge. One that protects her not from the world, but from her own patterns. Power used to frighten her. Not because she didn't want it, but because every example of power she saw was corrupted. Domination disguised as strength. Manipulation masked as influence. So for years, she stayed small. She called it humility, but it was really fear. Fear of becoming what she despised. Fear of standing out in a world that rewards conformity. But now she understands. Power itself isn't the problem. Unconscious power is. Carl Jung warned that those who do not confront their own shadow will project it onto others, often while convincing themselves they're helping. The awakened woman takes this to heart. She draws a new boundary, a sacred one. I will never again use my gifts to feed my ego. This boundary transforms the way she works, leads, and creates. Her ambition is no longer about proving her worth, it's about expressing her truth. Every project becomes prayer. Every decision becomes alignment. When she walks into a room, her presence speaks louder than her words. It's not charisma, it's coherence. People can feel when someone's purpose is clean. Her career no longer drains her because it's no longer an act. Her art no longer performs because it no longer pleads for applause. She has detached from external validation. She doesn't chase opportunity, she magnetizes it. And here's the paradox. The moment she stops needing power, the universe hands it to her in abundance, because true power isn't something you take, it's something you embody. She understands that leadership isn't about being above others, it's about being deeply rooted in yourself. And from that place of rootedness, her impact expands, not through control, but through example. She becomes a mirror of integrity in a world starving for authenticity, and through her, others begin to remember their own light. But there's still one more boundary, the final one. The line that protects everything she's built, the one that completes her individuation. There comes a point in awakening when even the need to awaken falls away. No more lessons to chase, no more wounds to fix, no more enemies to fight. She realizes peace isn't something you create, it's what remains when you stop trying to control life. This is her final boundary. The boundary against noise, against the endless doing that once defined her worth, against the world's obsession with proving, producing, performing. Now she guards her stillness like a sacred flame, because she knows the world will always demand more attention, more reaction, more movement. But not every call deserves an answer. Not every fight deserves her fire. She understands that silence itself is an act of power. In her stillness, she meets God, not as an idea, but as a pulse, steady, soft, unshakable. She feels the divine rhythm in her breath, the universe expanding and contracting inside her chest. Carl Jung called this the self, the totality of who we are when the ego finally bows. The awakened woman no longer seeks to be understood, she seeks to understand. She no longer asks for closure, she becomes it. Her boundaries are no longer walls, they are frequencies. You can feel them before she speaks. They are not resistance, they are rhythm. Not control, but communion. And in this sacred stillness, she finally sees. All the boundaries she drew were never about keeping people out. They were about keeping herself in alignment, in peace, in truth. She has come home. Once a woman awakens, she cannot return to who she was. Her silence speaks, her presence transforms, and her boundaries become the quiet music of her soul.